What's up, guys? Thought I'd make a quick video for you. As you can see, the car is just kind of sitting here, parked, looking pretty beautiful. We're just in the garage. I took the car off the insurance, and that's going to be it for this year. Haven't really had a lot of time to do much this year in terms of tuning the car, but we did get the engine put together this year, popped it in the car, running a base mat, sorted out all the kinks. You know, we had a couple oil leaks, a coolant leak we had, sorted that all out. The car as it sits right now is mechanically sound. So next spring, we'll actually be able to start having some fun with it and turning the power up. But in this video, I wanted to get a little bit more specific because I've been getting a lot of questions about whether or not this custom oil feed line here has solved my smoking turbo issue. And all I gotta say is yes, it has, okay? Because for the past 3 years, since we installed the BNR turbo, the BNR S4 version 2 into the car, it's just been, you know, smoking like crazy. So now we're gonna show you the smoking problem on D-cell. 2500 RPM, second gear. So 2500 RPM, oil pressure is right around 60. It'll let off the gas. Gonna get back on the gas. No smoke. Gonna go up to 3000 RPM. Oil pressure's right around 68. Gonna let off the gas. Gonna get back on the gas now. See some smoke.
Yeah.
Let's go up to 3500. Oil pressure's right around 72. Let off the gas. Gonna get back on the gas.
Oh yeah.
Gonna get back on the gas.
Yeah,
so it's coming out the turbo. And we've been trying everything in our power to try and resolve that smoke, because it's never fun when you have to do some pulls and A, you plume the person behind you with a ton of smoke, and B, every time you do like 4 or 5 pulls, you check your dipstick and you find that your oil level is dropped. That's never fun, and it's kind of annoying. So it was only natural for us to try and do the research to try and figure out what was causing it and how to mitigate it. So at first, the first thing we did was go with a Gen 2 valve cover and Speed Performance oil breather cap, right? Because we wanted to alleviate as much crankcase pressure as possible to allow oil to drain out of the turbo as effectively as possible. We tried that, did some more testing, found that it would still smoke and blow a ton of smoke out the exhaust. So the next step, actually, let me rewind a little bit. The first thing we did was actually run a restrictor bolt. We ran a JBR oil restrictor bolt, and that failed. And then we actually moved to a Gen 2 valve cover and Speed Performance oil breather cap. With those 2 mods in there, still a problem. It still wasn't working. So what we ended up doing is we tried the Damon Motorsports vented catch can, and it would still smoke. So we took it to the next level, and we went with a dual vented catch can setup with a Damon Motorsports PCV plate. Still smoking. So I was at a loss at this point. I didn't know what else to do. So I ended up calling Brian at BNR, and I ended up buying a BNR S4 version 3, just the CHRA, and I swapped the S4 version 2 CHRA out for the version 3. There's the difference between the V3 and the V2. Just the billet compressor wheel. The turbine wheels are exactly the same, and this should be good for about 20 more horsepower based on what I've read. So it's a nice wheel, isn't it? And as you can see in there, that is actually a BNR S5, and I'm going to touch on why we're running a BNR S5 in just a second. But even after doing the V3 swap, it was still smoking. So at this point, it's to the point where it's like, okay, I don't know what else to do. So I started getting into some serious thought. I even thought about drilling out the oil return hole on the bottom of the CHRA to try to get the oil to drain out more effectively. And I even thought about maybe running a custom oil return line, but little did I know, Brian had a solution for me. There was a new product that had just come out on the market, and Brian was aware of it, and here it is. It was the Turbosmart Oil Pressure Regulator, the T40 version. What this does is it reduces oil pressure to the turbocharger. So this regulator has a spring inside that opens up and bleeds oil pressure back to the oil pan at approximately 40 psi. Because the problem is, the whole problem with these turbos smoking is essentially just too much pressure being fed to the turbo, because the engine itself generates, like the oil pump generates 80 plus psi, depending on RPM, right? And depending on the temperature of the oil. So on a cold start, you're gonna have a lot more oil pressure, and that oil pressure is gonna increase as RPM increases. So that's why it's never a good idea to just start your car and start driving it hard and revving it out, because the oil is a lot thicker when it's cold and a lot more oil pressure is being generated. Like for me, when I start my car up and it revs out to like 2000 RPM on a cold start, I'll see like 80 plus PSI of oil pressure, right, on that cold start. And then as the idle comes down, it'll maybe settle at around 60 PSI, still cold. And then once it fully warms up after a little bit of driving, it'll eventually settle out at about maybe 25 to 30 PSI of oil pressure. So 30 PSI versus 60 PSI at idle, that's a huge difference, right? And as RPM increases, the oil pressure is also going to increase. So the problem with that is that you might blow out oil seals. Oil might not be able to get to bearings in time. Who knows, right? It's just let the car warm up. That's the best thing you can do before driving it hard. So there is a regulator in the actual oil pump that's supposed to regulate it to 80 PSI. But of course, when it's cold, it can only bleed off so much oil, right? So many little things to talk about, but not really the purpose of this video. But yeah, 80 PSI for engine bearings. Of course, we want more oil pressure for the actual bearings in the engine, right? Because that's super important, that's super critical. But 80 PSI being fed to a turbocharger's bearing system, it's a little bit too much. So that's what's causing the oil to actually get past the turbine seal and burn up in the exhaust. So what this thing does is it drops that pressure, okay? It drops the pressure by bleeding oil off. So oil actually comes from the block, from this line here, comes around, goes into this regulator, comes out of the regulator through the FP Red inline filter, goes behind the heat shield, and then goes into the turbocharger. When you run this setup, you don't have to run a restrictor bolt anymore, because the act of dropping that pressure completely, cures any sort of smoke. So you're running the stock banjo bolt right there. But of course, I am running a banjo fitting from Summit Racing, some Dash 4 AN fittings from Summit Racing, some Dash 4 braided hose from Summit Racing. Everything here I got from Summit Racing, including the regulator. The only thing that I didn't get from Summit Racing was the FP Red inline filter. So the FP Red inline filter is recommended when you have a newly built engine, because engine break-in material can actually get into the turbocharger's bearing system and damage the bearings. So Brian at BNR actually recommends that you run one of these with a custom feed line. So if you're going to do a custom feed line with any sort of bearing turbo, any sort of journal bearing turbo, you might as well incorporate a Turbosmart Oil Pressure Regulator, because you're going to have to do a custom feed line for a built engine anyways, just for the protection, right? So everything's from Summit Racing, and the Turbosmart Oil Pressure Regulator and the Turbosmart fittings, which is super important. You need to make sure you get these 3 fittings, 1, 2, and 3 on the bottom. Those are the only fittings that should be threaded into the regulator itself, okay? Do not thread anything else directly into the regulator. What happened with me was that I thought that I could just thread this FP Red filter on this side directly into the regulator here. But when I did that, it ended up starving the turbo of oil. Took the regulator apart, and yes, as you can see, took the cap off, we took the plunger out, and there's a spring that actually sits on the plunger like that, and it mates up against the cap, like so. So what happens is, oil ends up coming in from this side, it goes in through here, out through here, You can put a gauge here if you want. That's why there's a little plug here. And then what happens is when the pressure inside exceeds the spring pressure, this plunger here lifts up off of its seat and allows oil to go through the hole right there in the middle back to the oil pan, right? So it's a very simple design. What ended up happening was this FP red filter should not have been threaded in. I should have used one of their fittings from Turbosmart. There's a total of 3, one for the bottom, one for the left, one for the right. I should not have threaded this in because check it out. When I thread this in, it literally bottoms out right against the wall there on the inside and no oil can get through whatsoever. Okay, so I ended up putting the S4 version 2 in, and you can see in this picture that the compressor wheel got completely mangled up because the turbo was starved of oil completely, and there was a lot of play, and it ended up eating into the compressor housing and slightly scoring up the turbine housing. But obviously the turbine housing is made of cast iron and it's not really going to get hurt that much, but the compressor housing's aluminum, so it just totally ate into it. And that's kind of why I had no choice but to just sort of upgrade to an S5 because it had damaged the compressor housing. But we're at the point now where we don't really need to spend that much more money because the car's ready to go for more power. So do not thread in the FP red filter on this side directly into this side because it will starve your turbo of oil like it did with mine. That being said, this is how you should run it, okay? Have the oil go into the regulator first and then out to the red filter. After installing this, honestly, no more smoke whatsoever. All you really need is a Speed Performance oil breather cap and a sealed catch can with a check valve. That's all you need. You shouldn't have to have all these, you know, crankcase relief pressure mods because you're trying to sort out a smoke and turbo issue. I actually found that it would smoke a little more with the restrictor bolt because I feel like with the restrictor bolt, it slightly increases the pressure slightly because you're adding more of a restriction now. And just kind of how like you would put your thumb over the end of a hose with water, the pressure on the opposite side increases. I feel like that sort of same principle took place here with the smoking issue I was having. By putting a restrictor bolt in, you're essentially creating that restriction and just the pressure was just higher on the ejection point. So the BNR S5 now, let's talk about that a little bit. This turbo is definitely a little bit laggier than the BNR S4, but it's got a lot of potential for the future to make over 500 horsepower. We went with an ATP 90-degree dump tube, and in order to make this Tial 44mm wastegate fit, we had to run an ATP Low Profile Elbow, external wastegate elbow, which can be found on edgeautosport.com. The elbow has a longer section on one side and a shorter section on the other side. So you just have to figure out which way allows the wastegate to fit, and then you should be good. There is clearance down there. There's approximately maybe 2 millimeters on each side of the wastegate, and everything just had to get tightened up. Got my lines, vacuum lines running around here. Run up to the solenoid right here. Trying to keep it as clean as possible. We're breathing better, you know, the engine's breathing better, right? You got even flow coming into the intake, and you got even flow coming out of the engine. All right, so we got access to a hoist. We're gonna lift the car up. I'm gonna take a look at how we've got these lines ran for the custom oil feed line, and I'm gonna show you guys the external wastegate setup for the BNR S5. Okay, so the car's in the air now. So we got a clear look at what's going on under here. You can see the oil filter right there, subframe, got new lower control arms in there. So you can see our under-out piping right here, right? It goes up like that, up to the turbo, gets kind of close to the drive shaft, right? But it just clears and it kind of rests on the differential casing there. You know, Cork Sport rear motor mount there, stage 2. And here's our oil return for the Turbosmart Oil Pressure Regulator. Just kind of wraps around the piping, kind of tied it, zip tied it to one of the power steering lines here, and it goes right up to the oil pressure regulator right there. Just a straight shot right down, right? Pretty simple, not rubbing against anything, and it clears. For the external wastegate setup, you can see the 90-degree dump tube there. It kind of goes right up into the tunnel there because we had to tilt it upwards, otherwise it would hit the drive shaft. So it goes right up into the tunnel, and then it comes out right behind the subframe right here. You can see where we welded it right there. See that weld joint right there? That's where we welded it. And we just tilted it down and it fits perfectly right here.
Okay, so Eric mocked it up and we just tacked it now, and we made sure everything fits. And because I don't have any experience with welding pipe, what we're going to do is I'm going to stitch it together in very short bursts. I'm not going to run a bead because I know what's going to happen. I'm going to put way too much heat into the joint out of inexperience, and I'm going to melt a hole through. So we're going to stitch it.
So you're going to do a bunch of tacks, and then you're going to go in between the tacks little by little.
Yeah, and we're going to slowly just build a nice bead around this whole thing. And the good thing is, it just has to hold this pipe up. That's all it has to do. Okay.
Just making sure we're not missing any little areas for no exhaust leaks and all that kind of good stuff. And you see anything? How's it look, Julian?
Good to me. Let's brush it off with a wire wheel.
All right, let me grab a little bit of beer. How's it look? Not bad. Not bad for our first exhaust job. Yeah, that'll work, man.
Could be better, but
that'll work. That's under the car anyways. You can't even see it.
Not bad, eh?
All right, so we're gonna go bolt it up to the car now, and I'll give you guys a nice little sneak peek at that once it's bolted up.
It's cold, but it's not low bearing, so we're okay.
All right, it's a tight fit, definitely a tight fit. But we got Eric Yarborough's oil return line, so it clears the wastegate and all that. To get the actual wastegate to fit, it was kind of tricky because the Tial 44mm wastegate is pretty large. So you can see it right there. It's kind of like hidden in there. It was definitely very tight. We had to run a 90-degree elbow from ATP right off of the turbine housing on the BNR S5 because we could not fit the wastegate directly beneath the turbine housing because the downpipe would just be totally in the way. So as you can see, it kind of has a 90-degree elbow off of the turbine housing and then goes into the wastegate, and then the wastegate has a dump tube that wraps around the downpipe. So it's tight, but it just fits, and there's clearance all around. So that's how we've got it ran.
All right, here we go. Oh my God. There we go. Look at that mirror finish, eh?